Alright guys, we're back at it again for another video for SDI. Today we're talking about ring lapping for scopes. Now if you got a scope and you're going to be utilizing two separate scope rings to mount that bad boy, chances are you're probably going to have to lap it. So I'm talking about these guys. I feel like it's safe to assume that when they make those things, they're machined separately and they're also machined to accept any scope. Essentially what ring lapping does is you're going to be sanding those guys down with a lapping rod to make them fit your scope tube perfectly as well as perfectly aligned. I'll get more into detail about it while we're actually forming the procedure. Now, before we dive into it, I'm going to do a little shop update. I always include a little clip to all my videos of, what I've added to my shop because it's an ongoing thing. First things first, the light. Let there be light. I also finally picked up rifle cartridges for reloading. Right now I'm doing 300 blackout, and I gotta say that is way more tedious than doing pistol rounds, but it's coming along pretty well. All right, so tools. These guys will be set in the scope rings, and essentially, these things are actually milled to spec. You can actually tell that they're properly milled because they won't stay still on the surface. All right, finally. So essentially what we're gonna do first is mount the scope rings and set these guys in the scope rings, and these tips should be right touching each other. Touching tips, if you know what I mean. Now, since we're using two separate mounting rings, they're probably gonna sit a little bit like this, right? Or like that, or like that. We're gonna take this mounting rod, got a little handle that you throw into it. While these are on the rifle, we're gonna stick this in them with some lapping compound, and we're gonna essentially sand down these rings so they're perfectly aligned to each other. So, yeah. Also with the kit comes this very useful guide about the whole ordeal. And this, if you don't have a rifle to perform it on, you could just stick this on something and perform the procedure on this. Actually, that could come in handy for other stuff as well. Now, if you're wondering what kind of scope I got, I'm not gonna talk too much about it, but there it is. I got my real Avid vice block here. It won't focus on it because it's too dark. It comes out of this guy right here. I'll put the link in the description down below for this. Alright, so we're going to tackle this thing. Now, if you got a rifle that doesn't have like Picatinny rail on top and you're actually just throwing a base on so you can put a scope on, you can buy these kits on Brownells and Midway, wherever it may be. They come with these screws, so essentially you may have to tap holes for these screws to go in, and you'll just fasten this guy right on like that. Now, this lapping kit comes with instructions as well on how to do it. However, I'm going to be using the provided SDI handbook. So first things first, we're going to get these scope rings on there. Alright, so time to whip these bad boys out. So we're gonna slide these guys in nice and easy, get them to where they meet kind of in the middle roughly. We're not gonna smoke these screws down, but we're just gonna get them down snug enough to where these sit pretty firm. Now, anytime you're tightening down scope rings, you wanna try maintain an even gap on both sides as you're running them down. So you have to go back and forth quite a bit. So with an AR-15 with a pre-machined Picatinny rail, they're going to be pretty close. If they were this close together, a lot of people would argue that you probably don't need to lap your rings. However, a good practice is to do it anyways, because it doesn't take that long and ensures that, your scope's mounted properly. Alright, so we're going to get these guys out and we're going to prepare it for lapping. Oh, almost forgot. Really important part, right? This top ring, you don't want to swap them. So you want this front one to stay with the front bottom, and then the top back with the top bottom back. Man, trying to explain that really messed me up. I guess I gotta relearn English. Top ring goes on the left. This back ring will go on the right. So I know it goes to the right. Alright, so it's time to get our hands dirty. So first things first, we're gonna get some of this compound inside these rings, as well as the top rings. I would recommend using gloves for this, but I'm a jet engine mechanic by trade. So if I were to get skin cancer from anything, like chemicals and stuff, chances are I already have it. Now when you get this guy from the factory, it's going to be covered in like a preservative. I would recommend wiping that off, just in case it interfere with the lapping process. It doesn't tell you to do that anywhere, but it's good practice. All of my reloading equipment always tells you to wipe it off, so Now these you also want to be snug, but you don't want to completely smoke it down to where you can't turn the lapping rod. You're also going to be tightening them down as they're going to come loose a little bit while you're lapping, so keep that in mind. Now we're going to put some lapping compound on the front and back of both of these rings, because when you're lapping it, you're going to be turning it and moving it forward and back, and you don't want to have any dry areas. Take your handle, throw that bad boy in there, and then at this point you just kind of go nuts. Now as you're going through this and you're tightening these down to make sure you get a good lap, make sure you're tightening down very evenly, because if one of these is tighter than the other side, then you're going to lap it unevenly. Now, I would only recommend, tightening down the fasteners maybe 2 or 3 times, because any more than that, you might risk lapping the rings to a diameter that's too wide to hold a scope. So we're going to stop here and we're going to check our progress. Before we remove the top rings though, we're going to mark them, make sure we know which orientation they are. So you do want to keep the front on the front, the back on the back, but you also want to keep them facing the same way. Alright, so I made the mistake of not showing you guys what these look like on the inside beforehand, but essentially the inside was blued just like this, and when you lap them, the bluing is going to come off. And the fact that it's all silver now, pretty much 100% of the bluing was taken off, indicates that we have a full lap going on. A lot of times you'll see some of the bluing left, and you'll see like 60% silver, 70% silver, but if it's totally completely scratched off, it's not necessarily a bad thing, it just means it's lapped to precision now. So we're going to go ahead and disassemble this whole setup and clean all the lapping compound off the best we can. Alright, so let's talk about this, right? So my booklet here says, which I trust dearly, don't get me wrong, but you should be lapping to where about 90% at least of the anodized coating, that's going to be the black, is removed. To me, it looks like there's about 80 to 85, which I'm gonna work with that for now, because one, it's my first time doing this and I don't want to risk lapping these bad boys out to where I can't get a scope in there. And also, if I want to reuse these, I want to be able to lap them again for another scope. My camera actually died while I was cleaning them up, and which is kind of a good thing, because this lapping compound is way messier than I anticipated. I definitely underestimated that stuff. Now you want to be able to clean all the lapping compound out of the threads and whatnot, and you want to do your best to get all of it removed. I use this gun scrubber, and if you're going to use something like this, it works really well, because you can just hold a rag in here and just spray right into the threads, and it cleans everything out pretty good. It comes out with a lot of pressure. However, most of those kind of products have a degreasing agent in them, so if you do decide to use something like that, you gotta make sure you take a rag with some oil on it and make sure you grease these up a little bit, because if you don't, they'll start to corrode. It's mostly just the lapped parts, because that's exposed metal now, it's not anodized anymore, so that's gonna be the part that suffers corrosion if you don't oil it up again. So next step is we're gonna throw those alignment rods back in, and we're gonna check the alignment. Alright, so it's lapped, it's aligned, it's cleaned, and I put just barely enough oil to keep it from corroding over time. I wiped almost all of it off, so, because obviously you don't want lube where your scope's gonna be mounted. That's kind of a given. We're gonna throw the scope on now. What I think we should probably do first is check the leveling of the rifle first, because to start out, we're gonna want the scope to be perfectly aligned with the rifle. You don't want to totally smoke anything down until they're all evenly tightened, just to where you can feel a little bit of resistance, even resistance on all 4 screws. Now some steps after this include bore sighting and all that stuff. Honestly, for that I'll probably save for another video. As far as this video goes, that should cover what's required for the assignment that I did this for. Alright, so these videos are always kind of a wild ride for me, because I'm not really accustomed to doing projects like this while filming. I feel like this one came out a little better than usual. So, one thing I failed to mention though is before you put your scope on, there's a compound called resin, or rosin, not resin, rosin. And basically, you put on the scope rings before you put the scope on, but I don't really have that on hand here. So it's probably gonna be my next purchase. I'll probably actually redo the scope mounting off camera here in the future. But yeah, so that being said, stay strapped and stay safe.